I'm not really sure why it's such a huge cult hit. I'm not really sure why that movie's touched as many people as it did. It's one of the rare killers in a movie where at the end you can truly sympathize and care for the person who did it. Maybe that's what it is.
The fact that the movie had got finished is a fluke, okay? Just that it got finished. And that a bigger fluke is that it manages to actually hold together, because it actually shouldn't. It was done all wrong.
It's getting a little harder now to make these kind of films because so many have been made. And quite honestly, you're not going to shock anybody. And you have to like and find interesting characters, and then the rest is the icing on the cake. The reason that I sort of thought of horror was I had done two films. The Hard Part Begins about country music, and a film about wrestling called Blood and Guts, both about troops on the road. And both of them got pretty good reaction. Hard Part kind of paid back its cost and made a few dollars over time. Blood and Guts didn't do very well at all because back in the early 70s, people didn't go to wrestling. I mean, staggeringly, nobody could. I thought they would because it was big in small towns. Well, now it's huge, but back then there wasn't anything at all. So I'm kicking around. I've always been a designer and a graphic designer and art director. And I was kicking around, and there was a man called Charles B. Pierce from Louisiana, and he ran an advertising agency. And he would do ad campaigns for motion pictures, and he had done The Town That Dreaded Sundown. It was quite an impressive film amongst others. He'd also done previously The Boggy Creek Monster. So I thought, what if I come up with a concept for a horror film? That might work. So I sat down and designed an ad for a movie called Don't See the Doctor. And I got a great visual of a doctor staring right at you with his light on his, head. And took it in to see Irwin Yablans. And he'd just done Halloween. Showed him the poster. He said, great poster, but it's distasteful. We don't want doctors, that might turn people off. Think of something else. So he said, think about holidays. I said, okay. Come back, see me. Like the reviews for your films, and come back and see me, and we'll look at one of your films. So away I go. Now his offices were down on the west end of Sunset, and as I'm driving back, I pass a motel. And on the top of it, it says, for your after six formals for your prom night. That prom night, now that's an interesting idea for a horror film. It's an event. It's not really a holiday, but it's an event. So I went back and was fooling around with it. And I had been talking to a young writer who was at school at USC. And I said, I kind of like this idea, but do you have anything in the way of a horror idea? And he gave me a short story he'd written about kids in school and how an incident when they were in childhood came back to haunt them when they were teenagers. So I said, well, this could work, so let's put this under the banner of Prom Night. And in fact, that's what happened. And Bob Guza was the writer, and after Prom Night, he went on to a hugely successful career writing soap operas, very lucrative. But he was a very, very good young writer, and he'd written this short story, and we adapted it into Prom Night, and Bill Gray came in and did the script. While I was working with Bob, a woman I'd been talking to, a Canadian producer who lived down here, Deanne Judson, she called me and said there was a reception for, I believe, Telefilm Canada, somewhere in LA, in Century City, and did I want to go? So I did. And we went over there, and I was having a drink or something, and she ran into Peter Simpson and his brother David, and they had made a film for Warner Brothers called The Sea Gypsies, and it had done quite well at the box office, and then NBC had paid him a lot for the TV rights, so he was kind of primed to do something else, but he didn't know what. So Deanne brought him over and said, you should meet Paul, because he's got a kind of an idea. And I was talking about how I had talked to Erwin Yablans, who'd done Halloween, and he said, think of a holiday or something, and I was working on Prom Night. And I said, but I called Erwin back to tell him, but he's out of town, so I'm going to see him next week. But, you know, if I have a family film, I'll come and see you. And he said, no, come and see me next week before you see Erwin. And it was the fastest deal, I think, in the history of movies, because I met him on the Friday night, and on Tuesday, Deanne Judson and I were in his office, and by Tuesday night, we had a deal. We were talking about getting a name from television, and I liked a young girl who had been on, she was now in TV movies, but she'd been on the Brady Bunch. And we were kind of leaning towards that. And then I got a call, an odd call, from Jamie Lee Curtis's manager. Would you consider Jamie Lee Curtis? I said, yes. Well, we'd like to come over and talk to you. So I say, absolutely. Let me get right back to you. Jamie Lee Curtis wants to do it. He says, yes, so? I said to Peter, no, Jamie Lee Curtis wants to do it. Yes, she was in Halloween. Okay, but what about this girl from television? I said, well, no, Jamie Lee is going to be a big name because of Halloween. I mean, everybody knows her, and she's connected to this genre, and she wants to come and talk to us. Okay, I'll talk to her. So she comes over with their manager, and she sells herself. I mean, that was what was amazing. She comes in and sits down and sells herself. She's read the script. They asked, could we send a script over, which we do. And she sold herself to Peter. After that, the girl from the TV series was gone, and it was now Jamie Lee Curtis. And she went through an audition for dancing to prove she could dance. I mean, I'm amazed that Peter's making her jump through hoops, but she wanted it and she got it. And for some reason that I never did quite ask her about, she did 3 in a row. She did Halloween, Prom Night, and Terror Train. The rest of the cast was pretty well just out of theater school. I mean, just new kids. Mary Beth Rubins had just come from theater school in Montreal, I believe, as had the rest. And they just came as an ensemble, and they were wonderful.
Just to work with the awesome cast of Leslie Nielsen, of course Jamie Lee, and at the time Eddie Benton, who's Anne-Marie Martin, and it was quite an experience.
We were all sort of friends at the time, so we sort of just all kind of hung out together. You know, and we were doing different scenes because of the way that it's shot. We all had our separate times until it was in the actual school, the school scenes and the hall scenes. So we didn't really get a chance to spend a great deal of time together.
Prom Night was just another audition. And how I got the part, why I got the part, I really don't know. Somebody had once said to me years ago that I reminded Paul Lynch of him when he was a teenager. So, okay, whatever. So Prom Night was a complete, really, accident. It was a great opportunity and a great experience, for sure.
But it was just one of those magical kind of formings of a group of good young Canadian actors. I believe at the time the budget was $1.5 million Canadian. We shot for 24 days, and it was just the beginning of what I would say is the boom in Canadian film, because they had brought in certain tax shelters. When we set about the production of Prom Night, the crews were very minimal in Toronto. There were crews for commercials, and there was a big television crew because of the CBC. There weren't many independent crews. And the gentleman I wanted, who had shot my previous film, Blood and Guts, had taken a film in Montreal. So I had to start from scratch and put together whatever crew we could find, which was mostly people graduating from film school up there, because they just started to have a couple of film schools. And it was really tough because there were not a lot of people around. And our art director at the time came in from television. She had been a props person for television, and she came in and she delivered one magnificent piece, which no matter what, she didn't stay for long. She came in and she moved on, and then she was replaced by a jewelry designer who'd been her assistant and moved up to become a very good production designer.
Making the environments, creating the sense of terror, creating from the fabric of what was around me. Like, this was Toronto, it's a Victorian city, there was a lot of interesting buildings to work with, and I quickly saw what was available and what could be there. And like the first sequence of Prom Night, I went straight to the Queen Street Mental Hospital because that building on the lakeshore had always intrigued me. It was fenced off, you couldn't really get there, and you had to have someone take you there. I think during the process of looking for this set for the beginning of the movie, we actually opened up the ability for people to film there. I don't think that had been really done too much before.
We shot it in August, and Peter Simpson's had two brothers, David, who was the financial guy, and Richard, who was kind of the head of the Toronto office. And he had been a teacher and worked in the school system in Scarborough, just outside of Toronto. And thank goodness, because he was the one who got us the high school. Because they didn't want us in the high school, because at the end of August into September, before school starts, they have to clean it. So we had to work, I think we had a very tight schedule on two schools for like 2 weeks to get in and get out before school started. And then the rest of it was shot in the various houses and things like that.
I want to say Don Mills Collegiate maybe was the school that we shot in. And it was fine. I mean, it was hallways and locker rooms, just like school.
So it'd been a while since I'd been in high school. So it was nice when I walked into the hall, I was right back. And, with all the smells, the lockers, everything there, that sense of walking down the hall when there's nobody there. And that was, it really did. It gave you that sense of high school.
When we designed the dance scenes, particularly the one with Jamie, it was amazing that they turned out so well, because we had a camera crew and a grip crew. Those are the people who push a camera around on a dolly. We didn't have a steady cam back then. And they did an amazing job of following everybody on that dance floor, because they didn't have a lot of practice at it, and we did it pretty quickly. And my sister, who is a great choreographer in her own right, and now a dance teacher in Toronto, she worked out the choreography with Jamie and the young actor who played her boyfriend and died too early, unfortunately. He didn't really get a chance to have a career. He passed on in Italy. But she worked out the choreography with them, and they were both good dancers. Jamie Lee Curtis was quite honestly the Jennifer Lawrence of her day. She was that good. And she was a complete pro. She hadn't a lot of experience. But I guess being around a showbiz family and doing Halloween with Carpenter, she got it, and she picked up everything real fast. So she was a pro. She knew what the story was about. She knew what she was doing.
The first thing on the set with Jamie is she came over to me and she gave me a hug. And she said, "You're perfect as Jude." And it just made any kind of, trepidation. It just melted away.
What would any 17-year-old hormonal male's memories be of Jamie Lee Curtis at that time? Jamie Lee was absolutely fantastic to work with. The very first day that we met, she came and she grabbed me and she said, "Come on, baby brother, we got to get to know each other." And we went shopping just around the corner to the little Don Mills shopping plaza, and there was an Eaton's in that plaza way back when. And walking through that Eaton's, and I'll never forget it, and forgive me, Jamie Lee, for saying this, when she's standing and she holds up her bra and she says, "What do you think, baby brother, does it fit me?" What's a 17-year-old hormonal male supposed to say? I think I probably got embarrassed and turned 100 shades of red.
Are you going to help me with these, or are you going to just stand there and leer?
You're my sister. I'll leer.
That kind of established the relationship. She was fantastic at sort of demystifying who she was at the time, because she was a star.
My fondest memories of Prom Night are probably Leslie Nielsen, bless his heart. He was a real jokester on set. And even though I didn't have any scenes with Leslie, we laughed a lot and spent a lot of time together.
We wanted Leslie because he was one of the most experienced actors Canada had, and he'd been in the States since 1950, and he'd done all sorts of movies, television shows, everything. And right up to Prom Night, really no comedy, strangely enough. But that's who we wanted. We made an offer to him, and he said yes. But I got the cast I wanted. Leslie, of course, because of luck, nothing else, preceding us, had done the Zucker Brothers movie, Aeroplane, and of course, right after Round We came out, there was him in Aeroplane, a massive hit, so they kind of came together. Sheer luck, but he's a wonderful guy, a fun guy.
He used to have this rubber fart machine that he would have around with him all the time on set. And you know, we were like two kids in a candy store, him and I. And every time I saw somebody, I would say, Leslie, go up to that person and, you know, do that thing with them, and let's see if they believe it.
I remember I was in wardrobe and makeup, and I was sitting there, and all of a sudden I heard this sound. And I went, okay.
The very first moment I met him and one of those noises erupt from him, I had no idea what I was supposed to do.
And in the room where they were shooting, it was dead silent. And another one would go, and finally somebody who was not the director yelled out, "Cut! It's really beginning to stink in here."
He just said, oh, excuse me. So for the whole duration of the filming, he'd go down the hall and we'd pass and, you know, he'd give, you know, and one time, you know, he gave me a big hug and,
And when I drove him back to his hotel, Christopher Plummer was sitting at the bar that night. And we sat down beside him, and Leslie's machine came out again. And at one point, Leslie had to leave, and Christopher Plummer just kind of looked at me and said, "He really has a problem, doesn't he?" Whether he knew or he didn't, I have no idea, but it was one of those great memories that I'll always have.
I have to say, we kind of got back at him. We mooned him from the limo.
We just did this a lot on set. We laughed a lot. And I think one of the things that I learned from him is that, you know, he always said, have fun, Jeff. You know, really enjoy it, have fun, and do good work, but have fun. And, you know, I saw him a few times years after that on Sunset Boulevard driving his car, and we'd stop and we'd talk and stuff. And he was just always the nicest guy in the whole world. I was very fortunate that, you know, that Prom Night was my first film.
How about a muffin?
No cookie.
Like me better now?
It's an improvement.
Well, if you like it so much, why don't you taste it? No! Come on, be nice.
Whoa, Michael!
Alex was the younger brother to Jamie Lee Curtis, son to Leslie Nielsen. And Alex was a normal high school kid throughout the movie. He was the DJ at the prom. And really nobody ever suspected that when the mask comes off in the end, that Alex was the one who was running around doing all the dirty deed. You know, as people know, once they've seen the film, you know, Alex witnessed the death of his sister, and so many years later, he exacts his revenge on those who killed his sister. One of the funniest things that I recall on the movie was I had big curly hair at the time, and it's my understanding that they wanted me to have straight hair for the movie. And my first day on set was the fight scene in the cafeteria. And they spent about an hour and a half, 2 hours trying to get my hair straight. And it was another typical hot, humid day in Toronto for the summer. And within about half an hour, my hair was this explosion in a mattress factory all over again that it was. I think you could grab me by the legs and hold me upside down and use me as a Swiffer back then. So that was, you know, very funny just to watch the frustration that they went through that day. And then they realized they can't beat it. They might as well make it curly. And then when I saw the film and I saw that poor young guy who played me as a smaller version of me and the afro that he had, and I thought, oh, poor guy. He probably got teased mercilessly at school for weeks after that.
Vi. Time to go. We've got to get back.
There was another Canadian actress who was all over every television show from 1960 on up until the late 70s, called Antoinette Bauer. And I had seen her on those shows, and she stuck with me because she was a very attractive leading lady who was just edging into her maybe late 30s. But she kind of had a look that you couldn't trust her. Or maybe it was just I'd seen her in too many Perry Masons, where she was the killer, and I thought she is the perfect woman for Mom, so I got her.
No!
What are you, fairy tale princess?
My agent sent me into the audition, and Paul Lynch was there, and he had me read this character, and I was reading for this character who was at a drive-in with this girl, and she starts going down on him in the car. And, you know, I had to make all these noises and sounds like I was getting it on with her, and I just, for whatever reason, I just got really uncomfortable with it, and I said, I gotta stop here, and I can't do this. And so I started to leave, and he said, listen, why don't you read this character called Drew? And so I did, and I got it. Drew, you know, funny enough, he ends up, you know, getting this girl in the locker room, you know, Mary Beth Rubens. And then right after that, she ends up being killed, and you think, possibly I could have been the person who did that.
I think it was the ultimate chance to portray a virgin. And I don't think I've ever played one like that before again. It was the innocence, the new love, the first explorings of sexuality and so on, of course, with the boyfriend and in the locker and that kind of thing. And to me, it was an exploration of crossing over from the teen into young adulthood.
It was tough because the way that Paul orchestrated it, he was like, this is Mary Beth, this is Jeff Wincott, and you guys are doing this scene together. So, you know, let's go on over to the bench, let's crank the lights down, and let's see what you guys got. And so we start kissing and grabbing each other and stuff, and I'm like, you know, there was two thoughts that were running through my mind. One was, you know, this is crazy, and two, I'm really liking this movie business.
I died a virgin. You can't beat that. It was fascinating, actually, in terms of the whole build-up, the lighting, the setup, and so on. And I think one of the most enjoyable moments that I had in the film was after it was sliced and I'm lying on the floor, and the operator is on the floor, slowly moving on the dolly, and I had to hold my breath. And it right at close up, and you see you into my eyes and so on. And that was pretty cool.
The best.
Ever?
Well, you're my first too.
You know, my character was slick. It was a good chance to be sort of the good girl who gets a chance to, you know, have her first experiences. And so it was just fun to be able to have that comedic edge too, where I could just relax a little bit when I wasn't being killed.
I'll remember this night for the rest of my life.
Do you know what? I actually cried when I got into the Winnebago, because actually I had a little bit of a fear about people being around my neck, right? And so I had to have someone hold my feet so that when I go back out of the van, first of all, that I wasn't going to fall out, just gave me a little bit more reassurance. And it was a stunt man, but it was a real piece of glass. In fact, at one point there was a little bit of hair came out. So it was a very trusting. I had to really trust this stunt person to be that close and to be totally exposed. When I was on the set, one of the producers came and asked me whether I'd do that scene in the van naked. And I went, oh no, this is my first movie. I can't have my mom and dad go to the movie with me naked. I don't see anything in my contract saying nudity. Sorry, I think that was Mary Beth. That wasn't my first gig, you know. I kind of got a little bit of a hard time from this woman for not doing it. But I stuck to my guns because, again, as an actress, I thought, well, we can get around this. And I think it just makes that scene a little bit more, you know, that's a little more innocent. You know, it's a little more, there's more naivety of Jude.
Why don't we do it on the bluff? On the bluffs?
Prom Night was designed as a mystery thriller for teenagers with some fun along the way. That was always the design of it. because it was never intended to be like The Last House on the Left, which is truly a great movie, the original, but it was grotesque. It was never intended like that. When we finished it, we went back and enhanced it a little bit because the distributor, Avco Embassy, thought they could sell it better if they had a little more blood, so to speak. But it was never designed that way.
They were pausing over this problem of the head. How are they going to deal with this, the decapitation scene? And that was a fairly ambitious project at the time, to shoot this scene convincingly. We built an entire head. And building the entire head involved putting a skull inside it in order to make it anatomically as correct as possible. There was some jaw movement. We wanted to get as much life out of this, as it were, as we could. The characteristic that the jaw would loll, and you have to appreciate this is aged quite a lot, and the latex rubber that is the actual surface of the skin it's turned very, very dark. We all worked together to make this effect, and chopping off the head, that scene went pretty well. That went very well. David borrowed the head, wanted to take it home and show his mom. So he'd put it under his arm and come in and say, "Hi, Mom," with this head.
When we were doing the chase horror aspect of the film, we had found a gentleman who had been an actor and a stunt guy on a few small things. And again, with luck, he turned out to be fabulous. And after Prom Night, he disappeared. I've never heard from him since. And he worked out the choreography of everything leading up to the stunts, including the big fight at the end. And he doubled the killer. And he did a wonderful job. And he worked it all out, and he worked all the moves out and everything else. Wendy in the closet, the chasing up and down the hallways, because he was doing the killer, and then at the end we reveal it's Michael, but Michael wasn't doing the stunts.
A lot of the running around and stalking in the corridors was the stunt double. Certainly the most of the big fight between Jamie Lee and the killer at the prom was the stunt double. There were certain times when I was at one of the two different high schools that we were using, as I was there for another scene anyway, that I would don the mask and I would do some of the up and down stairs and along corridors. I did some of the chasing through the auto body shop. Interestingly enough, at some point in the film, and I can't remember exactly where, there is a close-up of the killer and he's got brown eyes. And the movie poster, when it came out, the killer has brown eyes. Whether that was misdirection or somebody made a poster based on that one close-up.
The reaction of her when she discovers who the killer is as good as anything on film. And there are certain magic moments in film that we have nothing to do with. That was movie magic, and it still is. Every time I see it, I really, really just think that's amazing that happened that way. That was luck. And it was her face and her reactions. Certainly the death scene. I took it all incredibly seriously because it was an important scene in the movie, obviously. So that particular night there was a lot of angst for me. Am I a good enough actor? Can I pull this off? The weirdness of getting all the lipstick put all over me and before putting the mask on. People still wonder why I'm wearing lipstick when they ask about that particular scene. It's one of the rare killers in a movie where at the end you can truly sympathize and care for the person who did it. And one guy, I'll never forget, getting down on his knee and saying to me at my table, "You know what, I was going through a lot of problems. My mom
was troubled at the time. I was troubled at the time, and he said, I found my escape in Alex, and which I found, okay. Don't forget, I killed everybody in that movie, buddy.
Hello?
Jude,
Yes?
can you come out to play tonight?
The first real horror film in Canada had been Black Christmas, directed by Bob Clark. And Bob had worked with Paul Zaza on the score for his film. And we saw it and said, let's try and get Paul to do this. He did Black Christmas incredibly well. Maybe he can do this. And the big thing besides doing the horror or the terror score was the disco music.
What they did was, which is totally wrong, they took a bunch of hits, like Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive, and Pat Benatar's whatever the hit was at the time, I don't remember. And all these disco hits that were giant hits, disco back in the 70s. And they shot the movie, the kids dancing to these hits. Okay, now comes the time they have to buy the rights to these hits. And of course, to Peter's amazement, he gets on the phone with the publishers and finds out, yeah, oh, yeah, sure, you can buy the rights. It'll be $800,000, you know, and which is probably more than the movie cost to make. And this is for one song. So Peter used a few four-letter words, which I will not repeat, telling them where they could promptly get off and jump and all that. And he came to me, the composer, and said, you got to come up with, I think it was 6 disco songs. And the kicker is, you got to do it in 5 days. It was less than a week, because we have a big screening for Avco Embassy and they want to see it in its final stage. So I had less than a week to write 6 disco songs that were going to be every bit as good as these giant hits for no money. I said, how close, you know, do you want? He says, I want you to come close enough that we get sued, but not close enough that they win. We ended up getting sued. You know how it is. We were sued for $10 million and they settled for 50 grand. So, you know, that's showbiz. So you would not win an argument with Peter. All you could do was keep it at bay and hope to eventually he would forget about it and find another argument. He was just so gruff and crude. 4-letter words were part of his everyday vocabulary. You know, the expletives would fly, even when he wasn't angry.
I was really blown away by his openness to money for art. He really actually took that to heart. He was not a you know, he was not crass in that way at all. He was serious about film. So, and he knew that it took money, and he was able to understand artists, I think.
He was certainly not afraid to roll up his sleeves and get his hands dirty. He was a street-smart Scotsman from Glasgow who came over here with 50 cents in his pocket and nothing but moxie and sheer just ingenuity, and made millions and made lots of films, and a lot of people made millions off of Peter just because of his ability to make something from nothing.
Producers have to see something, no matter how good an idea you have or a script or whatever. If they can't envision it and see what you're seeing, then there's no hope, and he did. And that was the real big plus. And Peter was a great producer. He passed on too early, and he was just, I worked with him many times, and he was like Sam Spiegel. He was the Sam Spiegel of Canada. A great producer, salesman, larger than life, wonderful, funny guy. And we had a great time together, and I miss him. And it's very hard, because those kind of people now haven't been replicated. There's no new version of them, really. was great working with him.
There's a special night in the lives of all of us. A night to be beautiful, to be desirable. A night we can break all the rules and make our own. Prom Night.
It was a lucky film from the get-go, and they did one of the best campaigns I can imagine. It was just remarkable. And it was one of the best horror campaigns ever. And they did that on their own to sell the movie. Made a lot of money, made a fortune in the end. And it got very nice reviews, and that was a really good plus.
That was in People magazine and Hollywood Review for my part by Robert Osborne. He actually critiqued me, and yeah, it was a wonderful critique. And so years later, you know, when I watched Turner Classic Movies, and well, he was a reporter, and he said I was the lovable one.
Well, here it is. There's the original mask. It has survived. My kids actually found it in a box in my mother's basement and said, "Dad, what's that? Is that the mask?" And I pulled it out and was shocked to realize I had had it all these years. I had no idea. It's very popular at conventions, and it's very popular at my kids' proms.
I'm very honored to have been a part of it. I had no idea, of course, at the time that it would become as popular as it is now.
Well, I think it's fabulous that, you know, every project we do as an actor, we never know how successful it's going to be. We just go in, we get hired, hope, you know, cross our fingers, we get hired, and we go in and do our work. And we never know if it's going to just be that combination and hit the general audience. So I'm thrilled.
The fact that the movie got finished is a fluke, okay? Just that it got finished. And that a bigger fluke is that it manages to actually hold together.
It holds up very well. And yeah, I am proud of it. And I'm proud of all, you know, my colleagues that worked on the film. I really think they did a super job.
You know, my dream is to work with people that I love to work with, that are good people, and to work with those people and to do good work and have fun at the same time. Like Leslie always said, always, never forget to have fun. And the day that I'm not having fun anymore in this business, I'm just gonna get out.
I think it was well made. I think, you know, the only criticism I would have about it is that it took a little time to set up each murder. It took much longer than we currently have the patience for. But I think back then, people had more patience for these things. And it was shot film style, and everybody cared about the look of it. They wanted it to be dark, and we had these high standards for making this movie, and that's why it's popular, because it was well made. And of course, Paul had relentless energy for this film, and you know, bless him, he really made this happen.
In the end, I would say that 75% goes to Jamie Lee Curtis, because she brought the audience in because of Halloween. Secondly, as time has gone on, I realize that so many people over time have seen it with their dates on and around Prom Night. And it held a special place for them because of that, because it's a moment in their life that's important, the prom and all of that, and they kind of connected it. And I think it's a very well-made movie, but I think they may give more to it than it deserves because of the circumstance.
The funnest part of it all is now, as my kids are graduating high school, they each want Alex to show up at their prom nights. And so the mask does come out. It came out 3 years ago for my oldest daughter's high school graduation, when her friends thought, wouldn't it be funny if Alex showed up at our prom? A year ago again for our middle daughter and for her prom night. And in 3 years, I will have one more daughter graduating from high school. So the mask will again come out. Alex will again appear at a prom. And then probably prom night will be behind me. Do you still like to play games, Wendy? Now it's my turn. Now!